Financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market shares fell today from 8-month highs. We saw risk appetite beginning to fade as, of course, trade tensions continue. And, of course, as we see the US and EU central banks reinforce worries about a sluggish growth. On the continent, Kenya's NSE 20 index surging almost 3% today. We saw Kenya Power and Lighting Company topping the gainers list, climbing almost 5% on the day. South Africa's JSE gave up some of its gains today as, of course, global sentiment soured. Of course, declines were registered across the board, with retailers amongst the biggest losers. Now, also coming up on the show today, Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir cedes 30 years of power as the military takes over. And we'll be looking at UK options after getting a 6-month delay to its departure from the EU. And BMW opens a new automotive school in the South African capital of Pretoria. Well, let's start off the show in Sudan, where the army has ousted former President Omar al-Bashir from power. This, of course, follows months of protests against the former president. Here's Ashta Tall with more.
After 30 years in power, former President Omar al-Bashir has been ousted by the military. Appearing on state television, Defense Minister Ahmed Awad ibn Auf announced Bashir was under arrest. The location of the former president remains unknown, though General Ibn Auf assured he was safe. He also announced the implementation of a 2-year military-led transitional government.
We announce a complete ceasefire throughout Sudan and the immediate release of all prisoners. This will provide an atmosphere for a peaceful transition of power and allow political parties to organize free and fair elections, which will be held at the end of the transitional period. A new permanent constitution will also be introduced.
The announcement comes after a 5-day sit-in in front of the country's army headquarters. Celebrations initially broke out after the news of Bashir's resignation became public. The Sudanese Professionals Association, which has been the main organizer of protest, however, rejected the army's announcement. The group called for continued protest, calling for power to be handed to civilian-led government. Their call comes amid an imposed curfew.
I am announcing a state of emergency for 3 months and a curfew for a month between 22 GMT and 4 GMT. We will be closing the airspace for 24 hours and all points of entry into Sudan until further notice.
The army announced public representation will be a part of the transitional government. The current constitution is suspended, with a new one set to be formed after the transition. New elections will also be held after the 2-year transition period. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, let's get the latest on the situation from Patrick Oyet. He joins us now on the phone in South Sudan. Welcome to the show, Patrick. And let's start off with the catalyst that led to the end of Omar al-Bashir's 3 decades of rule. Now, since December, we know there had been an outcry over rising costs of bread and fuel, as well as other economic grievances in the country. Patrick, what were the key factors that led to Bashir's downfall?
Yes, Uche, thank you very much. The major factor actually that led to Bashir's downfall is economic factors. As you rightly mentioned, the price of bread had gone up, the price of fuel had gone up, and the citizens who had even their own money in the bank, whenever they would go to withdraw the money, they would not find the money. And you go to the hospital because someone is sick, the hospital needs money, they want you to pay cash before they can carry out any treatment. Go to the bank, there is no money. You want foreign currency, for example, to travel abroad, you cannot get it. So the economic situation in the Sudan was so difficult, and that is what pushed many of these people to go out on the streets and start demonstrating. And even when people were being shot and killed, some injured, more people would the next day go to the streets and demonstrate, because the situation, the economic situation was really desperate. So basically, the 4 months that the demonstrations have been majorly were on the economic situation. It was the economic situation that forced people to the streets, and then the call for Bashir to go came later when they saw that even when they were demonstrating, the economic situation was not actually changing.
Now, of course, economists are saying that the country's secession from South Sudan back in 2011, that compounded its economic situation. Give us a sense of the economic realities Sudan has been facing.
Yes, that is really true. You know, the secession of South Sudan from Sudan led to one thing. Many of the oil fields became, or South Sudan seceded with many of the oil fields. And Sudan, when it was still one, depended a lot on oil export. Now, when South Sudan seceded, this oil became property of South Sudan. Sudan was not getting the much money it used to get out of the oil money. There was a lot of suspicion between the two countries, and in 2012, South Sudan halted oil production. That affected both economies negatively. It affected South Sudan, it affected Sudan, and just when South Sudan opened oil production or restarted oil production, then the 2013 civil war broke out in South Sudan. Some oil fields were destroyed. So the production of oil again was not that much, and then compounded with the issue of falling oil price, global falling oil price. All these factors were affecting the economies of both countries. But Sudan suffered more because Sudan had already, the citizens of Sudan had already gotten used to a certain level of life. In South Sudan also people suffered, but people of South Sudan have been suffering for so long, so this did not actually lead them to a desperate situation like demonstration. But in Sudan there was some infrastructure, things were set up, and now people were finding that they were not getting what they used to get. So this led to what we saw now until the downfall of Omar al-Bashir.
Well, Patrick, looking forward for the country, what we know so far is that a 2-year military council has been established, which will oversee a transition of power. The government has been dissolved. The constitution has been suspended. Meanwhile, we also hear that activists are rejecting the military's announcement and demanding for a civilian government. So is it clear, Patrick, what happens next in Sudan?
It's very unclear what happens next, but one can argue that possibly demonstrations are to continue because when you see the last 4 months, the civilians have been demonstrating. They have been going to the streets. They were the ones who called for President Omar al-Bashir to leave power. They went to the military just early this week, asking them to withdraw their support for President Omar al-Bashir. They said they wanted to negotiate with the military so that they would form a transitional government post al-Bashir. And now, for the military to come out and make this a military coup, because what it is actually a military coup. They have suspended the constitution. They are putting a transitional government headed by the army. They are talking of, a state of emergency and things like that. So this is now more of a military coup without regard to the citizens who went to the streets and demonstrated and put pressure until what has happened today. So yes, those who call for the protest, the professionals in the Sudan are asking the question, where are we in this government? And if you look at the history of Sudan, most of these leaders have been coming to power through military coup, including President Omar al-Bashir, who today has been ousted. He came like that. He said it was going to be for a short period of time. There would be elections and there would be civilian rule, but he got stuck in power. So the citizens are looking at a similar situation occurring. That is why it is most likely possible that people will continue demonstrating to ask for the military to hand over this power to the civilians.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, Patrick, for that update. Of course, that was Patrick Oyet joining us there in Juba, South Sudan. Well, let's move on now to Equatorial Guinea, where the country has designated 2019 as the Year of Energy. Now, their goal, according to the Minister of Mines and Hydrocarbons, is to position the country as the energy capital of Africa. Well, Angelo Coppola caught up with the Minister of Mines during a recent trip to South Africa.
So, Minister, you've just announced a new licensing round. Tell us a little bit about it. What's the thinking behind it?
There are going to be a total of 26 blocks. 2 of them are the ones that have discoveries. One of them is well known, is the former block of Ophir, that they have the Fortuna discovery. Now, it's very good because what it does is that the companies who actually bid for that, they will be able to bid not just for the exploration, but also we need to prepare a budget for development. Other reason that is a special license round is because it's also going to be a joint with the mining round. So it will be a first ever mining round. So the difference is that what we are focused on this stage in the mining sector is the exploration. It's for them to do geological studies, some drilling, and by that time in 1 year we'll be able to have enough information to go into specific areas.
Now, Equatorial Guinea is a member of OPEC, and there's always this misconception that OPEC is trying to control and manage prices by tapping into supply and demand. What are your thoughts around that?
At this moment, Equatorial Guinea is a member of OPEC, and there is a misconception about controlling the price. What all the OPEC members want is stability of price. We don't like volatility, because when you have volatility, it's difficult for countries to be able to have a long-term sustainable development, because you need to change the budget every day. Now, there is many geopolitical matters that are really out of the control of OPEC. We have the Venezuela situation, we have the Iran situation, now we have Libya, then Algeria is coming in a situation, and also there is issues regarding the consumers. You have China. It was a very big growing economy. Right now, it is growing, but not at the same level.
The gas mega hub that you're talking about at the moment, give us a bit more information there. What's the thinking behind it?
Right now, if you have a stranded gas discovery, if you think about doing an LNG plant or you're thinking about doing floating LNG, you start as a minimum price tag of $2 billion. But now, if you think that I will bring it to the asset in Equatorial Guinea, we are talking of probably no more than 120 millions. So you could see the math is there and the economics is there. So it's actually more enticed economically to bring it to our installation there. So the key thing for us is to do things step by step.
And now here's a look at our corporate headlines today. Passengers traveling on Kenya Airways can now connect to 11 cities in America. That's after the national carrier activated its code share with Delta Airlines. Now, the move, which opens seamless travel in the US and Canada, will see passengers avoid difficulties in connecting to other American cities once they reach New York. An MTN Group has been awarded additional broadband spectrum in Nigeria related to its 2015 acquisition of Visaphone Communications. The decision will enable the Johannesburg-based company to extend its network reach in Africa's most populous country. And Vodacom Tanzania has agreed to a $2.3 million payment for the release of its chief executive and 4 other employees. Now, last week, Tanzanian authorities charged the unit's managing director and other telecom executives with 10 counts. The charges include leading a criminal network as well as occasioning the government a loss of $4.76 million. And finally, American tech company Google has opened an artificial intelligence research center in Accra, Ghana. The AI Center, which is the first to be opened in Africa, will gather machine learning researchers and engineers in the country to facilitate local AI development. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's take a short break now, still to come. Zimbabwe seals a much-needed financial agreement with the International Monetary Fund. And the World Bank estimates Mozambique has lost up to $773 million due to Cyclone Idai.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now. The country has reached an agreement with the International Monetary Fund on a program that will address economic policies and structural reforms. Now, under the deal, policies will focus on eliminating the country's double-digit fiscal deficit in order to allow market forces to drive the functioning of foreign exchange and other financial markets. Suffering from decades of decline and hyperinflation, Zimbabwe has not been able to borrow from international lenders since 1999. That's when it started defaulting on its debt. Now, the Southern African state currently has arrears of around $2.2 billion with the World Bank, as well as the African Development Bank and the European Investment Bank. Well, let's get the details from Farai Makutuya. He joins us now in Harare. Farai, welcome to the show. Now, what we know so far is that there's been talks around a program with the IMF, subject, of course, to review by the IMF management. Give us the details, Farai, and what you know so far on that agreement, on structural and policy reforms, and certainly what exactly it will entail.
Well, Uche, indeed, an agreement has been reached, and essentially it is looking at trying to rein in the government's debt and control borrowing, ensuring that, effectively government is living within its means. So we expect that it will look at things like lowering the government wage bill, lowering government expenses, amongst others. We also know that the IMF is keen to ensure that the discrepancies or distortions that exist in the currency markets are eliminated. Currently, there is a huge distortion between forex rates on the interbank market, which is the formal market for exchange in foreign currency, recently introduced, and the black market, which continues to run away and is trading at a lot higher than what is prevailing on the intermarket rate. And so that has caused havoc in terms of pricing, in terms of planning for businesses. A lot of companies that are import dependent are battling and struggling still, despite this formal market being put in place. And those are some of the issues that this agreement will seek to address, ensuring that there is those discrepancies, those distortions are eliminated, ensuring that companies are able to access foreign currency at reasonable rates, and so therefore be more productive and therefore bolster economic recovery, ensure that the country recovers a lot quicker than it currently is, Uche.
Well, this agreement certainly could be good news for the country in terms of opening the door to re-engaging with international financial institutions. But of course, as we mentioned, Zimbabwe still has arrears with many of these financial institutions. What's your take on whether this could be a step forward in terms of solving that issue of arrears?
Well, certainly it is a significant step. It is a very big step going forward, because once you get this agreement with the IMF, if Zimbabwe is able to adhere to the conditions of this agreement, is able to meet some of the terms and the benchmarks that are laid out, then certainly it will build that credibility that is required. A lot of institutions will take their cue from the IMF, and I think which is why Zimbabwe is submitting itself, allowing itself to be part of this process, because it knows the confidence that it can generate, the sort of currency in terms of confidence and goodwill that it will generate by being able to follow through and walk this journey with the IMF. So certainly if Zimbabwe is able to meet its end of the bargain, to do what is required, to deliver on some of the key deliverables and ensure that it does indeed start to lower its expenditure, it does begin to service some of its debt, then certainly that will open up more opportunities for it to access more funding and indeed to also receive more foreign direct investment, because again, a lot of international investors will look to what the IMF is saying. If the projections, if the indications are good and are positive, then certainly they will want to do business, or at least change their sentiment as far as Zimbabwe is concerned.
Well, we certainly hope so. But Farai, we know the devastation from Cyclone Idai, that has been a burden on the country's already fragile economic situation. Now, the government did appeal for about $600 million in aid from both local and foreign donors. Give us a sense of how that Cyclone Idai has compounded the country's economic situation and how the help the country is getting going forward.
Well, Uche, we've spoken about this before, and we've said that, look, the cyclone couldn't have happened at a worse time than it did now, coming off the back of Zimbabwe launching another appeal for food aid. At least 5.5 million people are projected or estimated to require food aid between now and the next harvest next year, and so there is already that burden. Now the cyclone means that Zimbabwe will need to dig deeper and look for more funding in order to assist those who've been displaced, in order to address this emergency that is unfolding. What Zimbabwe has received now from local donors, from companies, from international partners, there's been an overwhelming response, certainly a very positive response to the appeals that have come through. A lot of what has come through now is very emergency, very short-term appeals, assistance, food, temporary shelter, water, drugs and medicine, which are required certainly in the short term to address the immediate emergency. But what I think Zimbabwe is now looking to address and now appealing for is the more medium to long-term sort of assistance, ensuring that these people who've been displaced, they will require to be relocated, to have new houses built, to have new infrastructure put in place. They will require some sort of social service and social support going forward. Roads that have been destroyed will need to be repaired and rehabilitated, bridges amongst others. So the more long-term assistance is what Zimbabwe is looking for now. It is obviously a heavier burden, and hopefully we'll see the sort of support that it's looking for, and partners and donors stepping up and assisting it at this time of need.
Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks, Farai, for your insights. Of course, that was Farai Mwakutuya joining us there in Harare, Zimbabwe. Now, almost 1 month after Cyclone Idai caused death and destruction, and still hundreds of small and medium enterprises are yet to resume operations, as of course the crisis continues to impact economic growth. Now, in Mozambique, the World Bank estimates the direct economic losses range from $656 million to $773 million. Now, more than 800 people have been killed and nearly 3 million others affected. CGTN's Robert Nagila is in one of the areas that were hard hit, and he filed this report.
Brick by brick, contractors rebuilt a wall torn down by Cyclone Idai at the Palmera Hotel, a popular destination for locals and holidaymakers in Beira.
We've had huge losses after Cyclone Idai. We've been closed since March 14th and hope to reopen in 3 months. We estimate losses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
The hotel's entire roof was damaged and must be replaced, while some sections will have to be rebuilt entirely. A major reconstruction effort by businesses is underway after suffering significant damage caused by Cyclone Idai. Beira's economy depends largely on the service industry. In January this year, the World Bank had revised Mozambique's growth forecast upwards to 3.5% from 3.3%. But with poor harvests caused by floods and significant destruction to infrastructure by the cyclone, the economy's growth is expected to take a dip. Economist Professor Ibrahimo Musaji says worsening conditions in central Mozambique will pile pressure on Beira's economy.
I believe this will also lead to movements from the rural area to urban areas, to cities. So we might have these movements looking for, let's say, better opportunities. This may lead to a social problem.
It is still difficult to quantify the damage to the economy, but many small and medium enterprises that contribute to the country's GDP are facing a mammoth task of rebuilding.
Most of them, until now, we are almost one month after the cyclone. Until now, they don't even start the activities, but they have costs to support, they have contracts to pay, and probably some of them will not even open again. So we might have unemployment.
In response, President Filipe Nyusi has formed a council to assess the damage caused by Cyclone Idai and to come up with possible solutions to spur economic growth. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Beira, Mozambique.
Well, let's move on to South Africa now, where travel experts attending this year's World Travel Market Expo in Cape Town say the African tourism market is reaching new heights. Now, for the first time, tourism businesses from across the African continent were invited to interact with high-level partners and potential investors. Renee Delcarme has those details.
Thousands of exhibitors attend the World Travel Market Africa every year to showcase their travel and tourism products to local and international buyers. And organisers say this year there are even more networking and investment opportunities than before.
The African tourism is really booming at this point of time because many of the global destinations, they are getting kind of saturated, if I can use that word. And Africa is becoming that new frontier, the new market that everybody is looking forward to visit and to invest their money in.
Organisers say this is the first time that WTM Africa exhibitors will rub shoulders with potential investors and partners from the World Bank, the African Development Bank and the Afrixim Bank. An opportunity they're calling a game changer in African tourism.
There's a lot of interest. Lot of willingness, because even the current investors in our parks, it's a small group. We want more competition, we want to diversify, we want different skills, because if you do that, you're expanding the cake. You make sure that there's a broader participation and there's more jobs being created.
Our African people so friendly with Chinese people. For the Chinese tourists, it increased in South Africa. At 2006, only for 60,000, but now slowly increase, reach the 100,000 per year.
And many of these global digital influencers say they'll now start focusing more on traveling in, as well as blogging and vlogging about tourism in Africa in future. Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, from fraudulent flights to non-existing accommodations, holiday fraud is a big business for scammers in South Africa. And now, as the Easter weekend approaches, fraudsters are looking for the perfect opportunity to defraud revelers via their credit cards. Well, CGTN's Angelo Coppola tells us more.
South African consumers face attacks on all fronts when using their cards to make purchases or withdraw cash.
Is really about the use of cash in the market, and so therefore the key point of compromise there is about when a client actually approaches an ATM to withdraw cash. In South Africa it's a particular concern, so the card swapping, shoulder surfing issue, and really we need to think about how we actually get clients away from ATMs. Now I know it's not a really great message, but really we're saying that there are other mechanisms to access cash.
For consumers in Kenya and Nigeria, the stress points are different because the big and small merchants don't have access to terminals. USSD is used for most, if not all, transactions.
So the challenge there is more about protecting the phone, protecting the actual, form factor that's being used to make the payment. So that's the biggest challenge in the market there. The other one is around remittances. It's about making sure that there's no interception of information there that could redirect the flow of funds.
For business people, there are also issues when paying for goods and services while on business trips on the continent. But have Africans leapfrogged first world countries when it comes to contactless payments via their mobile phones?
Can we go now and firstly, so for the smartphones, make your card credentials available on the phone itself and allow you to pay because it works similar to a contactless capability? Or can we use QR codes, at a merchant to actually enable that to happen? So yes, absolutely, we can definitely leapfrog the card itself.
Consumers have a choice. They can either go cash or they can go card. There are risks to both, but you've got to be careful. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come on the show. We'll be looking at the UK's options after getting a 6-month delay to its departure from the EU. And low-quality EU milk puts African farmers at risk.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories, are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's headlines. Now, in Sudan, the military has ousted former President Omar al-Bashir after 30 years in power, following months of protests against his ruling. Now, this leads to the implementation of a 2-year military-led transitional government. And in Egypt, authorities say 11 militants have been killed in the country's North Sinai city of Arish. Now, this comes days after ISIL claimed responsibility for a suicide bomb on the same region's Al Arish city market. The attack killed 8 people, amongst them 6 policemen. And WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been convicted by a London court for breaching bail terms in 2012 in order to avoid extradition to Sweden over an allegation of sexual assault. Now, Assange will be sentenced at a later date where he'll face a maximum sentence of 12 months in prison for the offense. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Now, the European Union has allowed the UK a so-called Halloween Brexit, setting the date for leaving the trading bloc on October 31st this year. However, many questions still remain the same as to where Britain's legislators go from here and how they'll use the next 6 months in their search for some kind of agreement over the terms of departure. Well, Richard Bestick's been looking at what happens next in the Britain's Brexit saga.
These, the battle-hardened foot soldiers in Brexit's seemingly unending saga, have at least a new trick or treat deadline, an extension till autumn should members of Parliament fail to agree terms before then. They have a breathing space and, as Prime Minister Theresa May said, a stark timetable.
The choices we face are stark and the timetable is clear. I believe we must now press on at pace with our efforts to reach a consensus on a deal that is in the national interest.
So May vows to use the extra time to fight on in a bid to get her much maligned deal agreed. However, the 6 months extension brings with it perils for the UK Premier, possibly a leadership challenge or a general election, maybe even a second referendum. The new EU timeline also brings with it Brexit's ultimate irony, possibly fighting European Union parliamentary elections while at the same time trying to leave the EU. Brexit talks between teams from the Labour opposition and government continue with waning optimism. On the streets across Britain, people suffering Brexit fatigue.
It's a lot of a mess. It's mucking a lot of things up.
Shambles, unfortunately. It is a bit embarrassing.
I'd like Brexit to just be stopped.
On the money markets, the Brexit extension greeted with a yawn and sterling unmoved.
Ultimately, all that will happen is that businesses will sit on their hands, they won't invest, which means that the UK economy will probably flatline for the next 6 months.
UK Prime Minister left the EU summit in the early hours with the words of EU Council President Donald Tusk ringing in her ears. Tusk said, don't waste this time, a test for Parliament really, because come October it'll be nearly 3.5 years since the Brexit referendum, and as yet nothing decided. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
Meanwhile, African and European farmers have taken to the streets of Brussels to call on the European Union to regulate a milk trade between the two regions. Now, the protest organizers say the European milk pouring into Africa is a health hazard to Africans as well as a threat to their livelihood.
We have had enough of this exploitation by manufacturers through European exporters who bring milk to our country. This milk is not the same that is used in Europe. It has been made richer with palm oil. And I think that in Africa we have enough problems. We don't want more public health issues added to them.
It's important because we have more than 40 million of people in West Africa who are living from milk production and livestock. So when you destroy their livelihood. They have no choice to migrate in Europe or abroad. So we are here to tell to EU Commission and the Agriculture Department, Trade Department, that the policies, the international laws regulating the trade and the exportation are really making people suffer in West Africa.
And moving on now, a British agri-tech startup believes that farms of the future could employ teams of small robots instead of those huge tractors and machinery normally used. Let's take a closer look.
The British small robot company is selling the concept of farming as a service, designed around its team of small, lightweight robots called Tom, Dick, and Harry. It says replacing the tractor with small, intelligent, precision farming robots will make farms more productive, profitable, and increase their yields and efficiency.
So this is Tom. Tom is the robot that will live on the farm. So Tom will trundle out into a field every day and night, we hope as well, and just examine the crops, take hundreds of thousands of photos of the crops, and measure all sorts of different attributes about them, photographing them in normal color cameras, as well as we're hoping infrared a little bit later on, to see things that even an expert agronomist may not be able to pick up on without very serious, careful detective work. And we're doing that for every single plant in the field.
One farmer trying out the robots says he welcomes the potential savings to be made in fertilizers, nutrients, and pesticides.
One of the main things I think is the reduction in the variable inputs that these devices will do, because obviously technology's moved on at such a pace that we can get much more accurate assessment of what's going on with each individual crop and actually target problems with the crop very, very specifically, and also apply fertilizers and any nutrients the crops need much more specifically as well. So one, you're avoiding the compaction, two, you're getting more accuracy. What more can you want?
The co-founder of the robot company says farming as a service would allow farmers to control costs and concentrate on developing their businesses instead of fixing machines.
So yes, you're right, we are taking away the driving of a tractor away from a farmer. We are taking away the changing of the pipes that have been gnawed by rats on their drilling kit because it's been left in a shed for a year. Yes, we're doing that. And by doing that, we're freeing the farmer up to really concentrate on making their farm successful and profitable business.
Gary Engelbrandt, CGTN.
And let's move on now to this year's International Horticultural Exhibition, also known as Beijing Expo 2019. Now, the event will kick off in the Chinese capital later this month. It provides a platform for artistic and cultural exchange, and it offers horticultural experts an opportunity to present their ideas and share their expertise. The construction of the main areas and pavilions are almost finished, and let's take a look.
After 2 years of construction, the pavilions, facilities, as well as the theater and public area buildings of the Beijing Expo have been completed. Planting is expected to be finished in mid-April, and exhibition arrangements in the pavilions are getting finalized.
The preparation work for the Beijing Expo is going according to plan. The construction of major exhibition halls has been finished, and exhibition arrangement is accelerating. Rehearsals and tests will be held at the next stage.
110 countries, regions, and organizations, including the UNESCO and the World Meteorological Organization, will participate in the 2019 Expo. In the World Exhibition area, 41 parks are under construction.
International workers are also working overtime now, hoping to finish all exhibition arrangements before the opening ceremony.
Chinese provinces, municipalities, and autonomous regions, as well as enterprises, have finished more than 90% of the floral arrangement and design of their parks so as to welcome visitors with blooming gardens. This is the second time that the Chinese government hosts the International Horticultural Exposition. The first time it was held in 1999 in Kunming, the capital city of Yunnan province in the country's southwest. Yang Ran, CGTN.
Now, the 5th International Arctic Forum, dedicated to the development of the Arctic region, has wrapped up in St. Petersburg, Russia. At the forum, Russian President Vladimir Putin stressed the importance of environmental protection while offering incentives for businesses looking to invest in the region. Here's CGTN's Julia Chapman with the details.
Inaccessible, unforgiving and largely unspoiled, the Arctic is a region of immense economic potential. President Vladimir Putin has voiced his plans to harness it, calling for fresh investment and setting ambitious targets for the Arctic shipping route.
Last year we have about 20 million tons as a cargo, and our president put the figure as 80 million tons by 2024. So it's 4 times increase in 5 years. This is a huge increase, and it's good for economy, but it could be very painful for Arctic ecosystem.
Experts say the Arctic is thawing faster than anywhere in the world, a fact the leaders of Arctic countries willingly acknowledge. But the region contains an estimated 22% of the world's undiscovered gas and oil. And as the ice melts, passage from Europe to Asia will become significantly easier.
This event is full of businesses looking to cash in on Arctic development, but the leaders of the Arctic powers know they have to strike a balance. The Arctic is a land of untapped opportunities, but it's also a fragile ecosystem, vulnerable to damage.
That may sound like an insurmountable task, but the UN's climate representative says business interests and environmental safeguards are not mutually exclusive.
You know, here in this region, some of the most prosperous countries have grown and reduced consistently their emissions and gone towards more sustainable societies, and it has been possible.
There are strategic considerations too. Countries with territory in the Arctic often have competing interests. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov played down the potential for rivalry.
We should drop these archaic geopolitical zero-sum games. We're convinced that in the Arctic there's no potential for conflict and that all problems that arise can be solved politically.
And that cooperation will extend well beyond the limits of the Arctic Circle.
China is not an Arctic power. It is still one of the countries that is close to the high north, and the changes that take place in the Arctic affect the climate, the ecosystems, the forestry, the fishing industry of China.
The Arctic is a part of the world where the rules are still being written, and the environment remains relatively unsullied. So campaigners are urging world leaders to get things right this time. And as the Arctic ice continues to melt, that plea will only become more urgent. Julia Chapman, CGTN, St. Petersburg.
Well, let's shift focus now. Take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices falling below that key $1,300 per ounce level today, as of course a firm dollar and improved risk appetite, also a rise in European airline stocks pulled investors away from bullion today. Now, oil prices dragged lower. Rising US crude stocks was a key factor, but of course prices continue to find a floor as of course OPEC-led cuts and free-falling Venezuelan output tightens global supplies. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still coming up. BMW opens a new automotive school in the South African capital of Pretoria. And Nigeria launches a pension scheme targeting the informal sector.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater,
This weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, South Africa's Gauteng Department of Education and BMW South Africa have launched a new engineering school with an automotive focus on Soshanguve, north of Pretoria. Now, the School of Specialization for educational purposes will focus on the automotive industry in order to boost technical and creativity skills amongst school learners. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with more.
Driving straight into the world of vehicle design and manufacture, the Engineering School of Specialization will focus on the automotive industry.
Our country and the world are moving into the fourth industrial revolution. We cannot afford to produce a generation of young people who only in grade 12 do they have to make decisions about what they want to do. So the schools of specialization that we are rolling out in Gauteng province are very important.
South Africa's Gauteng Education is working in partnership with BMW. BMW has already donated at least one of its X3 models.
We had to go and persuade BMW and say to BMW, you can't produce over 1 million cars from South Africa, but you have no school to train future producers of those particular cars.
The car company will also provide pupils with all the experience they need.
And what we also understand is to help give something back to the country is around education. We've taken this very, very seriously over the last few decades. We support 144 schools across the whole of the country, but this initiative today is a first part to give something back which is very tangible and very linked to Roslyn. So we took 20 X3 vehicles, which we're giving to schools, universities, all over South Africa.
At the official launch of the school, it was excitement galore as a group of grade 12 pupils prepared to reveal the car they had modified. It took 3 months for the 6 pupils to turn a 2003 BMW hatchback into a mini bakkie.
We make fitting and turning and do stuff. So this help us as young people so that we can have something new in our brains.
It's fascinating how cars work, and we never realized that because we are busy thinking about driving and all those stuff. But I think this opening will help us and give us passion in what we are doing.
This school will equip learners with the skills and knowledge to give them the best chance of success in life. The schools of specializations that are being built around Gauteng, like this one, seek to nurture talent and develop future leaders here in South Africa. They are also intended to respond to the skills shortage and unemployment crisis among the youth in the country. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Soshanguve, South Africa.
Well, let's go to Nigeria now, where the government has begun a new pension scheme mainly targeted at those in the informal sector. The micro-pension plan will provide pension services to self-employed Nigerians and employees of organizations with less than 3 staff. Well, until now, pension services were only available to workers in the formal sector. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
It's basically for millions of people like Stan Nwachukwu, a self-employed auto technician, that the Nigerian government came up with a micro-pension plan. He's one of the estimated 69 million Nigerians who work in the informal sector but are not covered by the country's pension scheme. But with the micro-pension plan, that would change, and Stan thinks it's a good idea.
When we are doing handwork, when we heard about this kind of issue, for me particularly, I'm in love in that.
The country's National Pension Commission is hoping that with the micro-pension plan, it would be able to achieve pension coverage for at least 30 million people in the informal sector in the next 5 years. It's an ambitious target, but some say it's very achievable.
I think if you look at the data, look at the mobile phone data we have in the country, by 172 million phone subscribers. It shows that the opportunity is very possible, and I think for them to be able to accomplish this goal, they need to use technology.
Nigeria's current pension asset is put at 8.6 trillion naira. PENCOM estimates that the MPP initiative would bring in additional 3 trillion naira in savings from the informal sector.
Contributions could be made daily, weekly or monthly as may be convenient to the participant. And how much a person contributes is dependent on his pension aspiration. That is how much he is looking to earn in his old age when he is tired and is no more able to walk.
Now, the guidelines stipulate that contributions by participants shall be split into 2, comprising 40% for contingent withdrawal and, of course, 60% for retirement benefits. Now, a participant is free to make withdrawals from the contingent account, including all accrued investment income into that account. As for the retirement account, the balance in the account is only available to the contributor upon retirement or attaining the age of 50 years. Despite the seeming flexibility of the plan, some people like Stan still have their fears, and of course, the fears are genuine.
When the time comes now, maybe if we go there to go and collect the money or something, they will be posting you, come today, come tomorrow.
It's a kind of concern and fear that might put a lot of people off the initiative.
I think if the narrative or the process in which PENCOM and its stakeholders go out to inform people and let them understand what this initiative is about, I don't see why they cannot accomplish their goals.
The opportunities and potentials of the micro-pension plan are no doubt huge. But PENCOM has got a lot of work to do to convince those in the informal sector to sign up to the plan. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Nigeria's naira trading in a range between 360.12 and 360.5 per dollar. Of course, traders are saying the naira has found support at around 360 naira per dollar, and that's because the central bank continues to buy excess dollar liquidity at that level. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling weakening against the dollar today due to dollar demand from importers and excess liquidity in the money markets. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.